All right. Hello and welcome. My name's Jon Cruz. I'm a longtime open source contributor, member of the Inkscape project. Recently started working with Samsung's open source group, last fall specifically. And as part of that, I needed to get up to speed on some new technologies, mainly Wayland. So here we go, decided to say, well, what did I have to learn to get going and get moving and be productive? Let's take that, present it out for you so that you get some idea of what it is, where it's going, why you might care, and all that other good stuff. So first, I think it's important to cover a bit of why Wayland. You know, that's a good question. What's the reason for the existence of this technology thing, whatever? It's a cool buzzword. You've heard it around, but you may not know what it is. Well, the reason for Wayland is really X11. If you're not familiar with that, it's the display layer that runs all the pretty little pixels to show up on your screen to make everything work and get get graphics where you can see them, text, and all that fun stuff. Well, what about X11? Well, it's a bit dated, a little crufty. It used to be a good way. It was a good way to transport information, get layout in a mobile way, network transparent, but much of similar to the network of physical rail of the older days. Eventually, things pass by, and the needs aren't the same. So, what is it about X that drives it, that causes the need for this? Well, first of all, X is perceived as old and crufty. Do we have any X developers in the room? One hand. Notice I say perceived. Okay. Don't lynch me yet. Its protocol and general architecture design is over 30 years old. That's a bit getting along there. Deals with provides server-side fonts, 2D drawing primitives, a lot of things that were really cool and innovative and would enable you to do nice CAD work, professional things at the time. May not be as critical to do offloaded nowadays. And another problem with the protocol, is it assumes all the clients are trustworthy because you're either running a computer or in a lab and you have an admin, and the admin knows what he's doing, and he takes care of your systems, and you're good, you're set. You don't have to worry about anything he does. Well, used to be. Nowadays, when you can afford to own your own machines, you might have to admin them yourself. Now, to be fair, X.org is doing a really good job of working around these things. I think that's why a 30-year-old design is still in play today. If you do it well, it'll last. And they did a pretty good job. They also allowed for different implementations. Now, X.org, how many people are familiar with X386? Oh, good, over half the room. So that used to be the Linux implementation of X that everyone was running. There were issues, there's problems, self-correcting system, open source. Suddenly X.org is now the reference implementation and where all the key work is going on. So yeah, it can happen. It can shift. If things aren't shifting enough, other things can come in and take over, which is kind of what we had to happen there. So it's basically X.org is now the industry standard. It really nails everything most any desktop has been, or Linux desktop, which are the only ones we really care about, right? Those are all running that. And because the protocol and the implementation have modular extensions allowing for feature sets, and X itself allows for that, a lot of what you wasn't even envisioned as a priority at the time the protocol was designed was still facilitated by the protocol and could occur. So 3D gaming on Linux is still viable, even though it wasn't imagined at that time. And on X.org, the feature development continues at a really rapid pace. There's a lot of good stuff going on. They're moving forward. So it's not like it's a dead end. It's not an old technology. It's not gone away. So again, we're asking why Wayland? Well, basically some Core X developers started talking about what if we started over, the next rev, clean slate, blue sky, wipe everything out, redesign it with modern needs in mind. So they started looking at protocol design with compositing as a core feature, throwing together the video buffers, the different displays, that you have. 3D focused. Most any system you get nowadays had some 3D acceleration. I mean, even bought my kids a cheap computer for doing schoolwork on a couple years ago, and that was AMD integrated CPU and 3D accelerated graphics. It's there. It's cheap. You can go in and drop $400 for a nice card and run some really nice gaming, but you don't have to. So it's very if the protocol doesn't focus on that nowadays, you're not going to be able to take as much advantage of it. And then application security by design. Everything's connected. Your phone's connected. Your phones get infected. Security is important. And especially because if someone can use a phone as an entry point to penetrate a corporate network, you're going to have issues. So those all need to be adjusted. So that's just overall why. And Wayland was actually designed by one of the core ex-developers. I will not try to pronounce his name because I'm a little bad at that. I'm sorry. The reference is all there. But now that we know why we might want this thing called Wayland, we'll have to move on to what does Wayland do? So I heard this word. It's mentioned. Some people said it. It's on my checklist. Fedora, they have it. NVIDIA talks about it. Other people, well, what is it? Well, what Whalen does is it focuses on the basics. It's very into minimalism, just doing its job and nothing else, which really is kind of the Unix way, which is where X diverged to become an everything in the kitchen sink. It's kind of lost the path on that aspect. It's really focused on compositing, just putting together your final display pieces, not doing a lot of this other work. You have Toolkits, you have GL, you have all these other things that can do that for you nowadays, when before you didn't. Also, it's non-blocking. So here's a question. Has anyone ever been trying to debug an application under X when you breakpoint it and suddenly your entire system freezes up? Blocking calls. That kills it. I mean, you can get on another computer, and at my house, that's what I do. I'll sit on a different computer, remote, and run it, or shift to the command line terminal. I don't know. It's a mess. So from the beginning, basics, non-blocking, very important, so that the modern workflow can operate without one component bringing down the whole system. Also, though, for Wayland, equally as important is what Wayland doesn't do. Wayland does not do any drawing. It does not have the primitives. Does not do lines. It does not do dash patterns. Any of that. Does not do fonts. I don't know if anyone used to deal with trying to configure font servers and client, and yeah, a couple. That was a pain. And trying to get it to work right and installing the right fonts and then making sure that when you go to print, everything is happy and matching. Oh, especially when every font was bitmapped, that was even worse. Few of those. And then into printing, though. X actually does printing. It's a printing subsystem, among other things. Wayland does not. It does not do printing. If you want to print, use something else. I mean, there's cups, there's all these other approaches you can use now. Why do it in your display server? It just doesn't make sense. And so, to sum up, Wayland is not trying to be its own operating system. You can look at the complete, current, robust, meet every point of the spec X implementation, and it's almost a mini operating system in and of itself. It's kind of like as Emacs is the text editors, where if your text editor can beat you at chess, I don't know, it might be a little over-engineered. Oh, God, go, please. I am not up to trying to beat a machine. Okay. So this is what Wayland does, and I think this is where we get to the point where I had a question early on, just before the beginning, about, well, can we see it running? Well, maybe, but maybe not. You may not actually be able to see it, because the key point, Wayland is a protocol. Wayland is not a display server. So often these come together when people talk about X. They're thinking about X, the protocol, Xorg, X386, or some other, you used to buy a $1,000 implementation so you could run it on your Windows PC, yeah. And I used Enlightenment to bring some of those down and show people, yeah, you want to run Linux instead, but, that's a side point. Wayland is not any of that. So in essence, a key thing, Wayland just replaces the X protocol itself. It does not replace the X.org server. And here's the point I want to say. It's up to other things to implement this protocol. In theory, X.org could also implement Wayland. There's nothing preventing it from doing so, and it's completely who implements it is outside of Wayland's scope. So no, do not take this to say that that's what X.org people are planning. This is just I'm saying completely hypothetical what if, just to show that there is this complete separation. And so then we get to maybe where the point of you're technically minded, you're trying to figure out how does this fit together. Maybe you're a little more visual thinker, so we need a pretty chart. So here we go, explaining what it does. And you'll see we have the Whalen compositor talking to different applications, some running maybe on Clutter, on GTK, on Qt. Doesn't matter. They're all talking to the Whalen compositor, but Wayland is not doing the drawing. The app's something else, GL. So leveraging Mesa, you get EGL and GLES. That's really good at drawing. That's really optimized. X servers, that's a separate issue. I've got a side point later on about Glamour, just to point that out. But the key here is that Wayland steps back and says, look, modern day systems have all these pieces laying around. Let's just use them. Let's not re-implement the wheel. So it just talks to the kernel, does the minimum stuff, lets the drawing be the drawing. It just says, application, prepare your buffer, tell me when I can start using it. Okay, I will tell you when I'm done using your buffer. And a few things like that. But it's not doing any of the drawing. So this diagram is really simplified compared to your average usual X interaction diagram with all the various extensions and 3D support and 2D and everything else going on and different layers for that and drivers. So these are the key pieces, including down for people who like TLAs. It also gets, well, acronyms, EVDev, KMS, and DRM. That's not digital rights management, by the way. Just to not confuse you with that. So, and it's still a very layered approach, very clean, but the point is Wayland just steps back and says, all these other technologies exist, they're implemented well, let's not re-implement them poorly or maintain them in parallel or incur all this extra expense. Let's do what's needed and then get out of the way. So that covers a bit of the information about what Wayland is. And then, well, kind of like the title of my talk, where is it now? So that's a fair question. People trying to figure out what it is, why, when, whatever. Okay, to clarify, Wayland's everywhere. Well, not quite, but almost. It's moving in very rapidly. It's being implemented in different technology stacks. So, and there's a split between high-level and low-level support. Toolkits supported, desktop environment supported, mobile and embedded supported. So on one hand, you have display system being implemented under GNOME. You have it being implemented under KDE, and I'm pretty sure those two groups are not sharing much code. They're each doing their own thing, doing it well. All they have to do is support the Wayland protocol, and then Wayland client apps will be able to run against any of them. And for mobile and embedded, you even get a weird, interesting world there, which I've seen lots of interesting talks, some even recently, some perhaps even by people in this room that cover some of the, like your in-car entertainment systems, IVI, all this other stuff, where some of this might appear. So it's coming in very rapidly. Personally, I've been following Wayland for many years. From the Inkscape side of things, I was working on the applications side of all these libraries, including this and Cairo and all sorts of other drawing technologies. So I've had a lot of time interacting with these people, Carl Worth, Peter Hutterer, who's still contributing to Wayland, but a bunch of other people, and Keith Packard, who used to promote Wayland and explain why we want this, what it's going to be. Did some good work. Some of them have moved on, some of them haven't, but there's just been a lot of time building up to this. But now it's actually getting implemented. And where is it getting implemented? I mentioned Toolkits. So just to cover in case, I just pulled up a rough sampling of toolkits here. If your favorite isn't on there, go talk to them and don't take it as good, positive or negative from me. I just grabbed a few of the more common. Clutter, EFL, which is the Enlightenment Foundation Libraries. So anyone who likes Enlightenment used to run it, maybe run it again. Devices, mobile, that's where it's showing up a lot. GTK, has anyone heard of GTK? Okay, yeah, most of them there. GTK 3.0 has complete Wayland 1.2 support. Of course, I think we just pushed out Wayland 1.7 as a release. So, there's a little more catching up to do, but these groups are talking to the people working on Whalen. The people on Whalen are talking to these groups, trying to all be inclusive and facilitate everything. Qt5 has Whalen support. SDL added in experimental support in 2.02. If you use SDL, I'm aware of it. I haven't had much chance to have at it, but it's very interesting and prevalent library. Then we have desktop environments. So a couple of the main ones, KDE, Enlightenment, Hawaii, I think is Wayland focused, GNOME, Mate. Again, this is just a quick sampling. It can be verified that have been working on Wayland support in one degree or another. So this covers probably, is there anyone in the room who this does not cover? 2 people only. That's 3 or 4, okay, 4 maybe. So that's actually much better than I thought. I thought, especially being at a technical Linux conference, you might get a lot more people with more unusual cases. So again, this list here is just representative. It's not comprehensive, so don't take anything one way or the other. But just saying it's moving in, it's getting stable, well, can I actually use one of these implementations? So it's not Wayland. Can I use one of these implementations that support the Wayland protocol? So, again, yes. I had a friend on social media post this just a couple weeks ago. He'd been using Wayland all day and didn't realize it till the end of the day. This is on Fedora 21. And I've looked and I found other people who are reporting when they run under Fedora 21 with its Wayland support. I think one person did a good blog post talking about how he had some issues with pause and resume, sleeping his laptop, but his hardware has given him problems with that on and off for a long time anyway. So he said, if that's the only thing I'm seeing, that's good. Do you have a quick question? I am not sure. In many of these cases, I've not looked to see what the display server is, if it's been replaced completely or not. Some of the implementations of Wayland do away with Xorg completely. Some of them ride on top of it. You just need basic support for EGL and GLES and some of the other low-level things that X rides on top of nowadays to be able to implement Wayland. So, and given that I'm working, well, especially with the group I'm working with, we work pure upstream as much as possible. My team sees very little contact with actual product. So it's like, I hear these things, I hear we're running on great hardware, I hear all these interesting stories, but I don't get any of that myself. So we can do a follow-up if you want to find out about that, but the idea was if they're running on Xorg or not underneath. Yes, quick question? Good question. So if you run packages that were compiled for something else and you have to run them under Wayland, are you going to have to get new versions of your third-party packages or applications? Are they going to have to be recompiled against it? Well, several of them, like GTK, I believe that has a runtime switch to flip. So the backend's already made to support X or Wayland, and will switch between them with just a runtime switch. Currently defaulting to X, I believe, but you can flip it onto Wayland and it will just work. In theory, of course, case by case, there might be edge conditions that don't quite match. And that brings us on to the next most complex pretty picture of where is Wayland now, which ties in perfectly. What if I have a legacy X client? Well, here we have, in this regard, the X client is going to talk to the X server, might be going through Glamour, which talks to Mesa 3D, which gets into the hardware. Whalen Compositor also is talking to Mesa. Wayland Client is talking to Wayland and Mesa, bypassing the X server. These all play nice together. It's unless you're actually looking for specific implementation details, unless you're testing something out, you may not even know which display system your application is using. And on one desktop running at one time, it can be a complete total mix at the moment. If you're trying to remote, that's an interesting question. If you're trying to remote Whalen, and if I don't have it on the slide now, I'll definitely cover it by the end. So we'll come back to that. But I just want to cover again the key technologies here, where you have like EVDev, KMS, DRM, Mesa 3D, playing nice, Whalen Compositor, not doing the drawing, just coordinating all the compositing, really. And then, of course, you can be completely outside of it, like some of the 3D game engines currently. They might take over your system. They might do their own direct stuff just to do what they want. And with a game, I'm fine with that. I don't care if a game interoperates with my other applications. I don't care if it shows up at the same time or takes over the screen. Okay, that's fine. I just care if it will all run on my computer without me having to reboot it or log out. And yes, at the moment, that's all happy. And then, who here is familiar with Glamour? Maybe one, two people. That's an interesting thing I found out about last month. Keith Packard gave a good talk about this in LinuxConf Australia. Basically, Glamour is implementing, I guess, the DDX driver. Anyway, it's implementing X drawing via GLES. So it receives from the X client the X command, draw this line with this bit pattern and this hash, and use this font, throw that here. It converts it into shaders and other operations, feeds it to GL, and uses GL to actually implement all the rendering. And suddenly, among other things, I believe you get hardware acceleration for 2D and 3D operations. And if I recall from the talk correctly, among other things, they start covering a lot more of these legacy edge cases of X that no one actually implemented fully. They can do it this way. But again, it's just replacing it naturally, cleanly, layering on top, so you're not using the old X drawing code anymore. It's something completely different, but your X client doesn't care. It doesn't know. It just keeps working. So that, I think, is one of the best things about the Linux graphic design, stack design. One more? Yeah. So Glamour, where it lies, it's an interesting thing, but we don't want to get too distracted by that right now. But I did want to highlight that, especially for some technical-minded people, that might be something to look into, because it's even Keith's talk is just amazing for what he explained, and having done a bit of GLES shader coding myself, I was like, oh wow, that's interesting. So that's kind of where it currently lives now, where you can run X clients, Whalen clients. And in the level there's X Wayland that can ride in the middle between X clients and Wayland, and you coordinate all these things. Then there's a completely different arena of the mobile and embedded markets, if anyone cares about those. Phones, Internet of Things devices, maybe in-car entertainment systems. That's where you have a lot of this. Geneva Alliance, which is the Automotive Industry Consortium for In-Vehicle Entertainment, IVI. If you're interested in that, that is just a really lively and developing niche market. So I'd call it maybe niche, not because of the number of users, but because of the number of developers and options and just awareness there is for that. Tizen is very prevalent out there for devices. Seems to be going steady. I watched when it was first announced. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And where's it going now? But it's found a good solid home under mobile and embedded. And there's a lot others, especially because once you get into hardware, things can be a small development effort throwing into millions of endpoints that appear. It's always amazing when I start looking at the direct hardware as opposed to just a general laptop or desktop computer world. So that covers, I guess, where Wayland might be at the moment, what's going on, how we decided to get there. So the next question might be, where is Wayland going? So that's a good fair point. So I'd say that Wayland is really hitting its stride. As I mentioned before, I'd been following it for many years, from early design, evangelism, basically ex-coders trying to say, hey, this is what we need to do. We need to step up, do this next kind of thing. It's being expanded by third parties. We're getting extensions and standardized features. And I think someone mentioned some questions of interest on this earlier. A lot depends on how many people contribute. So Wayland is a protocol. Then there are a bunch of Wayland implementations. And here's the main question people had, and this is the main question I had actually. When I first was told Wayland is the future, I said, what about remote? I live on remote X. Well, there are a lot of different options. It's kind of outside the scope of core Wayland, and there are many ways you can approach it. VNC, other technologies, I believe there was a RDP backend to remote Wayland that way. And again, a lot of this depends on what features you want, what kind of performance, because if I try to play one of my 3D games remotely over X, that just won't even start. That's a non-starter. And Wayland is all about 3D compositing and hardware and all that. So there's an interesting question on how to do it. But again, because it's just a protocol, you can launch against the backend. You can run a Wayland backend that runs on top of X. You can run a Wayland backend that doesn't have X.org or any X directly involved. These are all several different options, and I'm not quite up to speed on all the details of each configuration and each implementation. And however, the remote display is now, to me, looks like, okay, people were worried about getting the basics working first. Let's just get the thing going. Okay, now it's settled. Okay, let's move forward and get remote networking coming in. And then it also needs to be stabilized and more polished. There's a little bit, like I said, though, with the release of Fedora 21, a lot of people started running it daily who weren't Wayland developers. Some of them who even did it accidentally, and it's pretty solid. It's day-to-day workable. If you know how to report bugs but still keep using a system, use Wayland now. Let them know different implementations. So this is where we need to be moving forward and figure out. Now, also to me, my big impression is this is Wayland's year. This is the year where all this development, all this work, all this coming together of planning and all these different teams, the GNOME people, the KDE people, Qt people, everybody talking together, hardware manufacturers from different companies actually all contributing nicely. Yes! You heard it from him, not from me. This is the year of Whalen on the desktop. If you're using Fedora 21 with LXDE, I don't know because I haven't run it myself. Again, I'm a little upstream. I'm trying to remember if it's, check with your particular desktop team to find out. Some of them have to rewrite from GTK2 to GTK3 to be able to make the switch easily. Otherwise, some team could try to retrofit the needed support into GTK2, but I don't know anyone who wants to go through that much effort. So that's a fair question. And the other main reason I did not try to address that in this talk to that degree is because day to day it can change. I mean, even literally week to week, things have been changing. When Does anyone know the actual release date of Fedora 21? Yeah, a month or two ago. So I started this talk a while back. I didn't actually. I finished my slide deck this morning because I forgot to put the key point of it being just a protocol. I was like, oh, I've been practicing. I forgot to put the slide for that. But even from when I started the slide deck, that happened, and I was like, oh, try to make sure that it stays viable for the presentation because it is just being expanded, hitting its stride. See, that's what this slide says. It's really moving forward. Mm. Oh, am I going to mention Weston at all? Just hold that question for a moment. But on this slide, I wanted to point out there are extensions and standardized features. So there's a core set of functionality in the Whalen protocol itself that are core. Then other people are free to add their own extensions. You can propose ones to be included. You can add methods. You can add your new protocols. There is currently a huge issue to be resolved of client-side versus server-side window decorations. Some people think the the desktop compositor has no business drawing window decorations. Some people think it does. The Qt and KDE guys are on that camp, but they're, I believe, doing their extension for server-side decorations. So the client side can do its own widget, but then KDE can take over the decorations, and the Whalen clients will just do the right thing as long as they support those. And as we go, that's probably one of the key things for where's it going. The technology is in place, compiling, implementing it. There's more than a single implementation of the Whalen protocol out in the field today that you can use. Some are more solid than others. KDE and GNOME are both addressing it head on, so I think that covers the bases, the masses. People who use other desktop managers, including myself, they can push to help their teams make sure to do the right thing. They might wait a year for the other people to solve the problems, or they might want to jump in now to make sure the protocol extensions get crafted the way they will need it. But the group, the Weston development, the Whalen development is all very open to that, and the only debates I've seen are really about, is that truly core, or do we need to put that somewhere else? Not, oh, that's a bad idea. I don't want to do that because it's not my idea, which you often get. Uh, so what about the slew of other lightweight desktop environments that intentionally don't? Well, first of all, I would posit, well, one could make an argument saying that they're smarter, but I would just say that the users who choose a desktop other than KDE or GNOME are a little more discerning. They're a little more interested in what they're doing, and thus I think they're very helpful to their desktop of choice getting good Whalen support. If it doesn't have it already, tell them they need it. If they need it, help them figure out how. If they have bugs, help them fix it. If not, have them come to me, and I'll try to work out the right communication. And mm-hmm. Yeah. So on Fedora 21, when you log in, you can pick, was it Classic or Standard, X or Wayland implementations. And the Wayland is not the default. I've also been told that the GDM on the next Fedora is going to be using Wayland by default. Yeah. Yeah. So there are plans for that. And given, let's see, how often does Fedora release? Yeah. Yeah. So Fedora is releasing every 6 months to a year. Therefore, this next year is going to be very interesting for Wayland. And as I said, it's the year, or as he said, it's the year of Wayland on the desktop. And then someone asked, was I going to touch on Weston? Yes. That's the core thing. And I need to get heavily more involved in this. Weston and libweston is another thing I'm going to explain about. Where So far on Weston, I've been running, I've been code reviewing. I haven't been contributing additional patches yet because I have to understand what's wrong. And I have to understand what's right to spot what's wrong. And, then I have to go in and fix. Other than, bug fixes, I can go in. Code, documentation. Uh, Documentation and testing, personally, those are two things I love to get right on a project because you get those going and then it's easier to maintain. So that's what I'm working on. There was my first step in this arena. But here we're talking about what, let's see, Weston. Someone said, am I touching on it? Yes. So what is Weston? Weston is the reference implementation of Wayland. It covers the basics and allows extension. So by design, you can hook in, add modules, try out your protocol extensions, try to see what's going on. A question comes to Weston's future, because that is at the moment under very active discussion. We started having a discussion on mailing lists saying, okay, things are solid, we're good, we're usable. Weston proved that Wayland is a viable protocol. Its code is a little messy. What do we want to do? Do we want to clean it up? Do we want to make it more minimal? Do we want to make it, the minimalist bare proof concept to say, this gets you Wayland and wow, you're done? Do we want to make it be the bells and whistles showcase, kind of like X.org is for X11? You don't need anyone else's X11 implementation, I think, if you have a good Xorg setup nowadays. So that is a question for the future. How is it going to move forward? And I believe I mentioned earlier, a lot of this depends on people joining in and contributing. You can come in and help make these decisions. You can come in and look at where things are, point out to the rest of the developers where it is. You can become a core developer. You can jump in and guide the future of graphics on the desktop. Or you could just test it and give us bugs. That's always good too. And I mentioned there was a concept called libweston. This came up on the mailing list. There was an idea of asking about breaking out the core Weston implementation out to be a library that other desktops, compositors, whatever, can use as a base. Well, it turns out conceptually that might be a little difficult. Getting the implementation, it might be tied too much to its details. It might be, to make it into a reusable library, you might end up with very little code that actually gives you much benefit. Or you might have to write a whole lot of glue code that if you just didn't try to use Weston as a library, you wouldn't have as much work to begin with. And another key thing is choices for one compositor might be different than from another. So if we put out a library that implements a feature a certain way, if that breaks the use case of some other target compositor, they can't use libweston then. So conceptually, that's all things to look at. We need to analyze, and that discussion is going on. The code itself would probably require significant refactoring. Do not expect to see any concrete libweston appear in the next couple months, for example. It needs to be looked at and decided. And it reminds me of some other problems, such as implementing REST instead of SOAP. And my manager was asking me, well, I see all these SOAP libraries. Why don't you have any REST libraries? I was like, well, actually, the amount of code I need to do to glue in these libraries is actually the amount of code to implement REST. It is so simple and leverages existing standard. SOAP, I don't know, has anyone ever implemented SOAP protocol support? Not used it, implemented it? Yeah, I have. Oh, it is not pretty. So, again, we want to say what's going to end up working well. We might be wrong. We might come up with a decision that someone from the outside comes in and looks, says, oh, do this, this, and this, and it's done. Hey, that's great. If you might be one of those people, jump in. Join the conversation. And then we have clients. Ooh, those are the applications that run on top, so your applications. Weston has a lot of example clients. When you build, we put on Wayland sources, it will build the protocol, or if you go to the Whalen website, you can find out how to build Weston too, because unless you're using something else, Weston's actually good for testing your applications and anything else. They show up as Weston-whatever when you build it. The source is present in the source code. under the clients folder. Oh yeah, and this is all in public Git. And all my work is in upstream. You see what I'm checking in day to day, so none of this is secret or out of the way. Samples are written to highlight the features of Wayland. May not be so usable or not. Oh, here's a key point. It uses a toy UI toolkit. It wasn't intended to be in any shipping code. It does the work to get you an environment so you can do drawing and throw up all these fancy effects, but it's not really meant for data to work, so don't just copy the source and ship it. Unless you really do it intentionally, and then responsibility is not ours. So just for that. And uh, so does Wayland go full screen? Actually, what it is, Weston implements Wayland. So, and you can run, I double check me on this point, but I believe the standard is Weston can run by itself or it can be run from within X. Yes. So if you're running pure Weston, you can boot into Weston and set it up so you know what you're doing. Most of the time, I don't do that because I haven't had need to yet because I haven't tested some of those features, but it just runs in it. And so you can do Weston full screen, Weston under X, and some people have nested within that, and there's X Weston or X Wayland to run on top of that. But I did a quick screenshot of some of the demo programs in there, clipping test, drag and drop. I've done drag and drop and clipboard support in other systems, so if you care about this, this is really cool. If you don't, forget it. And then the little doodles all over everything are the Weston flower. That's kind of like their hello world. And every time you click on it, it changes its shape or color or transparency or something. And I ran a couple instances of Weston Smoke, this is where a live demo would be handy because if you drag your mouse across it, it creates particle effects of smoke and twisty, swirly things, and they keep going. And this is all pretty. But again, this can run full screen. This can run embedded. This was a screenshot I got from running inside of X. And I believe by default on the top right we have a clock that I cut out because I didn't want my wife to know what time I was doing this slide. But these are just some of the things. And again, the examples here are not to show you how to paint and draw. That toolkit they use is not really intended for it, but it's to show how to leverage the features of Wayland. And then as I'm moving on, about clients. So there are third-party example clients. Where do you find them? I don't know. This is even worse than the desktop support because it is changing daily, sometimes literally. So you just know to search for other examples. Don't only look for those Weston examples under client. Go out there and search. I'm sure more and more people are throwing them out. Hopefully a few people in here might start doing their own and then tossing them out for all the rest of you to see. Applications that work in Wayland. Again, here's a case where it used to be simple to give you a good list. Nowadays it's a whole lot more, and daily might flip over and depends whether you're building trunk or grabbing the latest release. And with GTK supporting it as a command line option, a lot of the apps support it without any extra work and don't even know they support Wayland. That is ideal. KDE, Qt, GNOME, GTK, those apps, they might be supporting it now and just not realize it. Perfect. That's exactly how it's supposed to be. So if you care, go poke around, look for specific things. And then I want to finish up with a little info on getting help, which for this, I'm trying to be able to give this talk in general. This crowd may not need to know it. There's this thing called IRC. How many people are not familiar with IRC? Like one of the young guys in the back. Okay, in that chat, discuss. There's Wayland chats for that. Mailing list. Everyone knows that. Does anyone here not use email? No? Good. Okay, that's what I thought. So there's archives. It's all public. We try to be very civil on there. If you have something of contention, go on to the IRC, toss it out. You might be addressing a point that's been hammered to death in the past, so you might want to find that out. So it's the Wayland room on Freenode. And currently, I'm in there daily, basically. Well, during the week. That's my day job. Great. I'm paid. John. Oh, my nick on IRC is Jon Cruz. Shocking. And on Twitter, I'm also Jon Cruz. No wait. Yeah. There's other reasons for that, but in the past, also in the mailing list. Yeah, and if you go to the Whalen website, you'll find out all this information. There are a few more charts showing like the diagram of how apps work under X, how it works under Wayland, which are now generated by changes I made. They used to be hand drawn. And now, hopefully, we come to the point where, by my schedule, I'm a little past time to start questions, but I've been taking few as we go. So, do we have more questions? And I'm not sure if I want to try to worry about the question mic, since sometimes those don't end up getting recorded anyway. So, hopefully, I'm repeating the questions helpfully enough. In the back. Hmm. Oh, no problem. Yeah. So to, okay. Okay. So to let people know, the answer was provided from the back that there are already three or more minimalist, lightweight environments to use that have implemented under Wayland. There are more going on. Tiling managers, especially, I've seen a lot of activity, a lot of talk where they are discussing, and to me, that is not how my brain works. I don't do tiling. I worked with someone who did. Someone I worked with actually ran into the limit when Emacs capped it at about 200 windows. He he ran into that problem and said and got them to fix it with the next release. And he did some of the fastest work and the most bug-free work I know of. So he was a pretty good developer. But there are a lot of things for that to do. Question right up here. Two questions. Ah, okay, two questions. First one is simple input events in X. Uh, for those who don't know, Weston actually has a library now, libinput, that is dealing with all that, is organizing all that and handling everything, and that is spearheaded by Peter Hutterer, who added multi-touch to X and all these other things. In fact, he and I for years had been collaborating on Inkscape supporting input devices. At the moment, I believe it's not quite up to supporting tablets yet, but oh yeah, I should have covered this a little better. I'll have to make a note. It also supports multi-seat. So Wayland design, it allows you to have multiple seats, multiple monitors, keyboards, desktop, and libinput also supports that multi-seat support as needed. Tablets and other esoteric devices are coming. Mouse keyboard support is pretty solid and is in a standalone, split-out, reusable library spearheaded by a guy who knows input. So that's a good point. So yeah, that's where we are with input right now. Other question is, how does Wayland avoid the situation X got into with all the extensions and capability? Yeah, that's a little bit longer answer. Well, actually, maybe not even longer, given the first answer. However, first thing, Whalen wants to dodge it. Wayland wants to say, no, not my problem. Whereas X wants to say, oh, yeah, I'll take care of that. I'll do that for you. I'll do that for you. Boom. Suddenly it's doing everything. Wayland is supposed to do one thing. How to do it is a question. So you get fewer extensions, hopefully. Shell extension might have been a demo or not, how to do a desktop. But one person's opinion of a desktop might be completely different from another, so a common interface might not work. Tiling window managers start to come to mind right there. You may not even have decorations. Then there's a lot that you can collaborate on these extensions. It's easy to add, but the biggest thing, half the problem is dodged by Whalen trying to be minimalist. Half of it is dodged, or another half of the remaining is dodged by all the other implementers of extensions coordinating and collaborating to come up with good extensions. Then you are still going to hit some of the problem, but not. I'm expecting not near the level that X hit. Okay. Another question? Oh, commercial NVIDIA drivers. How does that play with Wayland? I don't know. None of my current boxes have NVIDIA chips on them that I'm running or none of the boxes I'm running this on have NVIDIA chips, so I had not looked yet. I do know sometime last year, now NVIDIA has been tracking this and following and trying to implement. One of the NVIDIA developers said something about Wayland keeps doing weird things on them and surprising them, and it's like, okay, you have some need, come talk to us publicly. Let us know what you're looking at and what the problems are, and we can address them. So that, as far as NVIDIA. So if NVIDIA is hitting some trouble with their internal development, they just need to coordinate with us so that we can either take their feedback or give them a little heads up or, do some of this because you have, the big players in video cards all like to make their cards the best. They like to eke the best performance out of it. So, and Wayland doesn't want to get in the way of anyone. So I'm hoping they're going to come out with a lot more solid commercial support soon. If not, this is the point for customers and consumers of NVIDIA to ask them so that they can start bugging us on the Whalen project itself to get it right, get it coordinated, and get it solved. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at the details. Oh, has Valve been working with any of us? I don't know. One of the things I can say is a lot of the people who work on Wayland work for Intel. Many people at Intel have worked with Valve. I do not know if there's an overlap between Intel people who've worked with Valve and Intel people working on Wayland, but it's not out of the realm of possibility, and it's actually one of the things I've looked at myself. I'm saying, oh, Valve, Steam boxes, Steam OS, we should look at this. So that is on the slate. That is on our radar, definitely, to see what they're doing. And even maybe the first thing I was thinking of, you remember I mentioned there are a lot of different options for remoting? What is Steam doing now? It's remoting your whole 3D game. What are they doing? Might be just throwing video, but they get enough feedback for the input. We might hook into that protocol. Someone could do a Wayland backend using that, and there you go. Suddenly you're done. So there's a lot to look at there just with Valve. Okay, real quick, just a second. Oh, yeah, I think we're a little over time, so we're trying to finish up real quick. A couple more. You had a question? Mm-hmm. Does Wayland work in QEMU? I don't know. Try it out. Let us know. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm actually approaching that point myself, so I have to start looking into that too. So real quick. Oh, we have to look at the details in the protocol as far as multi-seat. The initial thing is one computer running separate monitors with separate keyboards and separate individuals logged in. There's a little more you might get to do with that, but again, Wayland documentation talks about that. But to know to look for the seat is as an entry point into how things are organized in the protocol. And, yeah. Oh, has work been done on managing users login? GDM is switching to using Wayland or with Fedora on the next round, and there's a lot of activity in that area, and I see a lot of talk. Yeah. I'm not sure. You have to check in the details, and it is very dynamic. That field is changing all the time. Well, we're a little bit over, so I'm going to go ahead. Thank you all for coming. You can come up, ask me afterwards. Hope you enjoyed.